Excuse me. However, some good news on the vaccine front, adding to the good news that we're seeing in the markets today. AstraZeneca's vaccine getting the green light in Britain. This could potentially be the third vaccine approved here for emergency use in the United States. Let's get to former investment banker Carol Roth and market watcher Scott Martin. Let's talk about this, Carol, because it's certainly boosting the markets today. The biggest issue that we have right now is how we can tamp down the spread of cases, whether there's a variant or not in this country. The vaccines are going to be essential to that. So you see AstraZeneca getting its approval overseas and might be the next one to get it here. That's good news for us, even though, you know, we want that light at the end of the tunnel to be a little bit closer.
Yeah, I mean, it's good news, but, you know, as I'm very fond of saying, investors like to pay more for possibilities than realities. And if you look at the news on the vaccine in terms of what's likely to come out that's still positive versus what could potentially come out that's negative, I feel like a lot of this good news is already baked in, and that there is much more of a chance, you know, whether it's supply chain disruption, whether it's the slow roll out of actually getting people vaccinated, whether it's, you know, the new strain, whether they find out something doesn't work. I think that the negative news has much more of a potential future impact on what's going to happen in the markets than good news, because I do just feel like a lot of this is already baked in.
That's troublesome. Scott, I got to ask you, as I'm looking at the markets today, green arrows, you got the Dow up 162 points as we're speaking, the S&P up 11, the NASDAQ composite up 39 points. Are investors excited about the vaccine? Because, you know, yesterday when we were on the fence about what's going to happen with stimulus checks, you know, 600 or 2,000, they weren't as optimistic, maybe taking some profits. So what do you think is motivating the investor base out there today?
Yeah, investors are excited, and I think they should be, but you used the word troublesome, Jackie, and I think what is troublesome, too, is the fact that investors, to Carol's point, are not looking for anything bad to happen. In fact, if you look at the bullishness, just take your average analyst or take your average commentator, the bullishness is running pretty wild these days, and that does scare me, because when we're not looking for, say, something negative, that's when the negative news comes up and delivers quite a punch. So with respect to how markets go going forward, leading up to this full, say, vaccine saturation into society, there's probably going to be this kind of slow melt up. But then it's kind of going to be, I guess, like I think like a Three Stooges poster I had once upon a time, which is like, okay, now that we're kind of out in the world, now what? And now that we have the vaccine and everything's effective and hopefully the economy is fully reopened to the capacity at which it was prior to COVID, what do we do now? And I think that's when the markets come back to a bit of reality after we get there.
Yeah, and Carol, it's so interesting because even though we were through such a treacherous year with the pandemic, the market's still, you know, booming, recovering. They're looking at reopening. They're looking at getting back on track. You've got really low interest rates. That's pushing more money into these markets. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today talking about investor appetite for IPOs. $167 billion raised for new listings on U.S. exchanges this year. That is phenomenal. But on one hand, you would say, investors don't have anywhere else to put their money.
Yeah, and also, you know, as a former investment banker, I always like to tell the dirty secrets. And what do you do when you're concerned that maybe the markets aren't going to be as strong in the future? Is you call your clients and you say, now might be a really good time to sell your business. Now might be a really good time to get public. So if you think about, you know, where we are today versus where we are in 2019 and what's been happening in the market, I imagine there are a lot of people who've made that call. Not to say that there aren't a lot of fabulous companies that went public this year, but there's definitely going to be some concern about the opportunities to do this going forward. And I think that's why, you know, in a year that we had, that you said, more than 100% increase in IPOs. I mean, the market is just so disconnected from the economy. It's unbelievable.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in January, how investors internalize all this information and start to think of their strategy for next year. Guys, you're going to stick around with us. We'll see you a little later in the show. Really appreciate your time today. Coming up.